So Wayne is not here for a couple of weeks, so I'm getting a head start on my tenure. So if I screw it up, I get some grace. But we are going to do things a little differently today. So where is Les? I saw him. Oh, there he is. Okay, so we are going to combine the song and the four-way test today.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I know. See what happens? Wayne goes away and it all goes out the window.
Goes the pipe.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
there we go. This works. So this is to the tune of When the Saints Go Marching In, and it goes like this. Is it the truth? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Hold it, let's start over. Ready? Is it the truth? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? One more time. Is it the truth? Is it the truth? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? We'll improvise every time. Okay.
Very good. All right, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Steve Wingfield's going to have our prayer today.
Lord, we thank you for the building the life and have a good time in Rotary. And thank you for this club and all that it stands for. I pray that you help us to continue to do good in this community and around the world. Thank you for food, for health, for strength. I pray for those that are living under conflict around the world. We pray for the peace of Jerusalem today. Lord, that you would move within that country and bring peace and healing. We give you this day in Jesus' name. Amen.
So, also today we have a special recognition, and so we do the perfect attendance things from time to time, but we have a special one today. Jonas, you see it? You were getting ready to eat, and then you went down. 25 years. And so Wayne did not give me the pin, but he threatened me if I did not recognize you today. So I think we all need to recognize Jonas for 25 years.
Let me just share, Rodney, briefly. When I joined in '98, we were meeting at the Sheraton, and we had, I believe, 220 members. I had to wait 6 months to get in to have room. But you were there. I'm not that old. You were days.
I was there, Jonas.
And we had several that were 50, Sam Shrum, 50
Oh,
years.
yeah.
Perfect
Sam
attendance.
Shrum, 50-some years.
We are glad you have stuck around for 25 years. I do not have any family of Rotary announcements or comments that have been given to me. Are there any that we should be aware of?
Ash has a brand new daughter.
Oh,
Ash people.
All right.
Give the name, please.
Yeah, I guess it would have been on the 20th, we welcomed Admiral Joanna Heaton, and she's named after her living great-grandmother who lives in Ireland. And little girl's healthy, mom's recovering nicely, and we're managing a whole 4 hours of unbroken sleep.
I was going to say, you look pretty good. Do you have to get up in the middle of the night too?
No, it's not.
Okay.
She has to do the hard part.
There you go. Good. All right. Well, then we're going to get on with our program. We're delighted today to have David Tree from JMU. And so David is Associate Professor of Sociology at James Madison University. He specializes in qualitative methods, and his research examines issues pertaining to international migration, labor, community, and leisure. His first book examines the vital role of play and public parks in developing social connections in the city. Dr. Tree is now completing a new ethnographic project on H-2A agricultural guest workers in Virginia. As a college professor, he especially enjoys teaching courses that introduce students to sociological perspectives that they can use in their everyday lives, as well as courses that get the seat of their pants dirty and actual empirical work. David, welcome. Yes, I'm going to take this mic around.
Top middle. This one, yep. There you go.
All right, can you hear me all right in the back? All right, it's absolute pleasure to be here. So again, my name is David Tree. I'm a professor at James Madison University. And first, I'd like to thank Shannon for the invitation. I work with his wife. She's a colleague of mine at JMU. So thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really excited. I live up the road. I've been here in Harrisonburg since 2013. Always wanted to get into this building, so I finally got in. So thank you again. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm going to talk a little more about this in a moment, but it's real special to be here in the Rotary Club because a lot of ways my life intersects with the Rotary Club, and that my father in 1977 received a full scholarship from his Rotary Club in northern France to pursue a master's in Chicago at the Loyola in Chicago. It was a full scholarship thanks to the Rotary Club. And he did not return to France, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it's my life is in part, thanks to the Rotary Club for that scholarship. So what I want to talk about today, just very briefly, and make sure I'm on time because I would like to. I know I heard people leave at 1, so I want to make sure there's a chance to maybe have some questions and some discussion about kind of what it means to think sociologically. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I'm guessing some of you are familiar with sociology. You're definitely all familiar what it means to think sociologically. It allows you to get through your day. But I just want to just kind of briefly talk about what we mean when we talk about what it means to think sociologically. Right? And really sociology is the systematic, and this is important for us to really emphasize kind of the scientific, the rigor, the methods, all right? So the scientific study of social life. Right? And here the emphasis is really on the social. Right? And this is often in contrast to, or in tension and dialogue with the natural, the biological. Right? So sociology is really interested in the world that people create. A lot of that's rooted in nature and biology, all right, but emphasizing the social world. So sometimes, what does it mean to study social life? Right? Usually, especially my students think, sociologists study certain things. Historians study other things. Political scientists study other things. Sociologists have a certain, area of study. Well, what I show is actually sociology study all sorts of things. All right? As I'm going to mention, I studied pickup soccer for my dissertation. So clearly you can study all sorts of different things, all right? I would play soccer and drink beer, and somehow that was, I got a job out of that. So clearly, we don't study things that economists don't necessarily. It's much more about how we see the world, all right? This particular angle of vision, all right? This kind of quality of mind, all right? That kind of creates these, again, a lot of this is how you think about your life. It's not really that necessarily always earth-shattering, but it's this really kind of this sensibility, this way of seeing social life, this perspective. And most famously, we refer to this as the sociological imagination. Right? Now, the person that wrote the book, this on his motorcycle, C. Wright Mills, so he was a kind of a radical guy, no helmet. But this is probably the most famous quote in sociology in terms of how we see the world. And again, I'm guessing all of you are able to see life in this way, right? That you realize that you are not this pure individual, always free will. Right? You probably get this, but sociology is all about kind of fine-tuning this way of thinking, of seeing the world. Right? So the sociological imagination enables us to grasp, right? To see, to perceive, to really understand on a deep level, right? History and biography. And usually when we talk about these two different concepts, history we usually think of as structure, right? These big social forces, and biography, our agency, our individualism, our kind of free will. All right, so we have history and biography and the relations between the two within society. Sociology is all about trying to look at the intersection between biography, all right, agency, and history structure. Usually when we think of history, we think of large scale forces, capitalism, democracy, different understandings of gender, schooling, associational clubs like the Rotary, and everybody's individual decisions and behaviors and the relationship between the two. All right? Famously, that is the task. All right? That is what sociologists should be doing. And again, other disciplines are doing this as well in their own way, in the same way that you're doing that every day of your life as well. But that is the task of sociology, and also the promise. This idea that there is something really liberating and enlightening when we can see the connection between our biographies, the choices, our behaviors, the decisions we make to have children, not to have children, all right, and how that relates to the larger society, all right, how we give childbirth, what it means, how we organize it. I also had a child in September, and how it changes your life and all the and so forth. All right, so that is the promise. All right, to put it in another way, famously, neither the life of an individual. So if we want to understand social life, we can't just look at individuals. All right? Nor the history of a society can be understood without understanding both. So that's kind of the sociological imagination. All right, another way to put this, and somebody put this differently 100 years before this, was Karl Marx, all right, in a very kind of gendered way. Men, all right, people make their own history. All right, we all decide to wake up in the morning to put the clothes we put on, to go to the events. You decided to come to this luncheon today. All right, so obviously we make our own history, all right, but not under circumstances. This is a big word in sociology. Right? Circumstances, context, situations, contingencies of their own choosing. All right, so we make these decisions within certain kind of circumstances. All right, so one of the exercises I do with my students is naming. All right, so you had a daughter, right? Yeah, all right, so he had a daughter, all right, so it was their choice, all right, and I have 3 children, a very important decision. You gave this rich history of how it's connected to your great-grandmother, you said. So there's a lot of meaning and history and cultural significance to this choice, all right, so our daughter, her middle name is Rose, my great-grandmother, all right, so it was very kind of deliberate in our choices, all right, felt very kind of individual. But this choice of naming our child is within certain circumstances. So the big one obviously is gender. What does it mean to have a boy name, a girl name? The significance of culture, history, family biography, immigration. For a lot of people, religion is really important. We also have expectations, the famous a boy named Sue, he knew that he wasn't going to be around for his son, so he's going to give him a name to toughen him up. All right, so we have certain expectations. All right, so this very kind of individual, rich, powerful, intimate decision is tied up in larger circumstances and structures, big things like gender, race, nationality, culture, religion. All right, and that's what sociology tries to look at to grasp this interplay. All right, and obviously this has changed. All right, the meaning of names have changed. All right, and will continue to change for all sorts of reasons. All right, so that's kind of the way of thinking that I try to impart on my students, but also that's me in there. Also in my own research. But let me go back to my first point about thinking sociologically about my father there. All right, so he got the Rotary Scholarship, which is a big deal. He's a country boy from northern France. This opportunity to go overseas in the United States, especially at that time, was really, the big dream. All right, so he received this scholarship. All right, so he worked hard. Trust me, he told me how hard he worked. All right, to get this. All right, but he also was in a certain environment. All right, and he was able, as I don't exactly know the social significance of what was going on in terms of the Rotary in northern France, but there were certain things about him that allowed him to get this wonderful scholarship, and he goes to Chicago. All right, and the local Rotarians, is that how it's Rotarian? Where this kind of favorite son, go to Chicago, bring back that knowledge and bring it back to France. All right, those were the stipulations. Right? Very clearly go back to France, and I think that was part of his intentions. All right, but like life, all right, he went to a French club. My mother was a Francophile. She was a French professor, loves everything France. Was recently or in the process of getting divorced from another Frenchman, and met my father. All right, this is 1977, and all I have to say is I was born in 1979, so you can see kind of what happened in those years where he did not go back. All right, but another reason he didn't go back to France, I think my mother might have been open to doing that, is she was in the process of a somewhat messy divorce with serious custody issues. All right, so this idea of going back to France was not necessarily possible. All right, so yeah, that's very much about biography, their kind of messy divorce, and it was acrimonious, but it was also about laws, all right, in terms of the ability to leave with her. I should have mentioned, sorry, that they had my half-sister, my older sister at that time. So, sorry, Rotarians in northern France, I'm staying in Chicago. He was able to mend the bridges there, and he stays in Chicago. So really, again, any individual biography looking in the larger history. And here's about the rules, whether it's about immigration, the rules of the Rotary Club, and so forth. All right, so thank you. And it was really when Shannon reached out, it's always been important. My father would speak very, very highly of the Rotary Club in northern France. And whenever we'd see a Rotary building, he'd always remind me, it's thanks to the Rotary Club that I got this scholarship. He did, it was a master's in industrial relations. I don't even know if that's still a master's anymore. But okay, so thank you. And on behalf of my father, thank you as well. So again, very briefly, because I know you said 1 o'clock, and I want to give some time to talk about this, especially my second study is very local. It's really about a local workforce that some of you might have firsthand knowledge with right now, or in your younger days. Right? So thinking sociologically, my research, I've thought sociologically about pickup soccer and picking apples. Right? So for my first book, again, sociologists are curious. There's a sociology of everything, including pickup soccer. Right? So my first book, my only book, hopefully there'll be another one, is called Football. All right, that's soccer in Spanish in the park. All right, immigrant soccer and the creation of social ties. All right, what this book looks at, it looks at how pickup soccer, and this is, I'm sure some of you are like Robert Putnam, Bowling Alone, and really talks about the decline of organizations like this idea that people don't come together. We're much more individualistic. We mentioned 200 members, I think he said, when you first started. But, I think Robert Putnam doesn't realize that these clubs are still very much thriving. I think he might have overlooked how clubs like the Rotary are still thriving. But I'm looking specifically at how pickup sports and public parks allow people to come together and do something fun, of course, like you guys were having good jokes, a good meal, but also to do things that are quote unquote more constructive, like build relationships through the soccer. They would play soccer and also hang out. And most of these were Latino immigrant men, many of whom didn't have a lot of connections, didn't have a lot of resources, and they would come together in this park, have a good time, build relationships, but a lot of them would hire each other for jobs, refer each other, pass on knowledge. And my study is, the nice thing, as Shannon knows, it meant that I played a lot of soccer, would hang out with the guys a lot, and really look at what was going on in the social life of this park. And is there audio? I should have asked this before. Probably. No. Will it make noise if you press play on it?
It might not work.
Okay, let's see if it works. And this is just to give you a sense of the fun, the creativity. There's no sound, is there? It's all right.
We don't have a connection.
Pretty good.
Okay, that's fine. I should have said something before. There's a lot of hooting and hollering going on. The guy on the left is one of the older guys. This is after they would play these pickup games. They would congregate after. We'll maybe start from the beginning. It's very short, sorry. The old guy messes up.
Vamos, en taco.
And not to incriminate them, but they're not drinking soda, all right? Part of the fun. But this is the world I'm trying to capture, and the fun, but also the work and the creativity for these guys to come together and create something fun and engaging. So that's kind of what the book is about. But obviously there's a larger pretext, there's a larger context that these type of men are not always welcomed. Right? They're often kind of vilified, especially by media sometimes and by certain politicians, that they're often kind of vilified as a threat, right? Or sometimes as saints, as these wonderful, hardworking people. And my book is just trying to show that these, like everybody, are complicated people that swear sometimes, that drink sometimes, but also love each other and care for each other, and to really give this kind of more full, human, kind of complex portrait of them. Right? So that was part of kind of the impetus of the book, is to try to get to know these men. Right, and the other kind of impetus for this book is that what I also learned, so this was a park in West Los Angeles, a relatively upscale, affluent area, where none of the men really lived in that immediate neighborhood, but most of them worked in that neighborhood. Construction, painting, gardening, cleaning. And this part of Los Angeles very much depended on and welcomed these men as workers, right? But their playing in the park was not always welcome. And there's this famous kind of quote in Migration, immigrants are kind of welcomed as workers, right, but not always as people. Right? And as people, they weren't always welcome. Now, some of the complaints, I'm a homeowner, I live a couple streets here, there was some noise, there was some traffic. I mean, some of their concerns were warranted, right, but some of it was really about kind of who these men were and who they represented, because there was this big effort to close down the soccer field, which I talked about in the book. So that's just kind of just a little sense of what this book is about. So it's available on Amazon if you're interested. So this is, there's an introduction. And the first chapter is really getting at the work that goes into organizing a pickup soccer game. So if any of you have played pickup sports, pickup basketball, you need certain, you need to organize things in a certain way. You need to come together. And what happened is they built this new soccer field, and suddenly there's way too many players for the field. So they had to set up some kind of system, right? Just like you, at the beginning of this meeting, you have your rules, your rituals, your routines. They had to set up similar rules, rituals, and routines, which involved jerseys, timed matches, winner stays, this whole kind of structure. If you go to UREC at JMU, there's a similar thing going on in the pickup games as well. All right, but that is to really show kind of the organization, the collective efforts of these men to create this game when they are, quote unquote, field insiders, but also neighborhood outsiders. The second chapter is a real kind of deep dive into the meaning and richness of playing sports together. I have this whole kind of argument is during these games, all right, everybody, the worst player, the best player, the skinniest player, the largest player, the funniest player, the silly, what have you, everybody would every once in a while have that moment to be great, right? Where the men would cheer them on and applaud them, and they would talk about these games, which was especially meaningful. A lot of these guys were, had some hard luck, right? They didn't always have, some of them were sleeping in their cars, but this moment on the field, they could, quote unquote, be great, and that's what chapter 2 is. Chapter 3, this was the other part of my research that I had to do, was drinking beer and looking at the significance of drinking beer, but it really wasn't about getting drunk. Most of the men didn't get drunk necessarily. It was just kind of a way to be together. They would pool money in to buy cases of beer, and if you put $3 or $4 or $10, it didn't really matter. It was very kind of collective, and how kind of favor trading, treating each other's for beer brought these guys together. The next chapter, and this is why sometimes, especially in the media, immigrants are either seen as kind of saints, hardworking, wonderful people, or kind of sinners, sometimes seen as bad people. And again, these are complex people, and every once in a while there was the occasional fight that would break out at the park, and I tried to make sense of that in chapter 4. And then finally looking at how connections made in the park translated in work exchanges. They would work for each other, they would refer each other, and to really show why, pickup sports and public parks, having space for people to play is really important for more kind of, significant outcomes like employment. Right? So it's really a case for having accessible playing space. And this is something I'm guessing this is maybe part of your agenda sometimes, looking at playing space, park facilities in Harrisonburg and elsewhere. All right, I'll skip a little. This was a really, this book came out in January 2021, and the world really kind of changed. It was changing at that time. So I wasn't able to go out to the park when the book came out, but this is one of the main guys, Polo. He sent me a photo. I shipped out a bunch of the books. He sent this photo of him holding my book in the park, which was a really touching photo. And then finally, I was able to get back there this past spring break with my son, who was born in Los Angeles. They actually threw a baby shower. Again, the type of research I do is called ethnography, participant observation, very immersive. So it's really your whole body and experience is part versus like lab work or survey work. And so they threw a baby shower for us, and he was born the next day, 2 weeks early, and so the big thing was, he had such a good time, he loved the pupusas, that he came out to experience this world. So they nicknamed him Zizou, so soccer, Zinedine Zidane is this really famous French soccer player, and they saw me, and this is kind of how they, especially deal with white people, let's go with the French side. So I was, my Frenchness was very pronounced there, so they would call him Zizou. So it was really touching. He hadn't been back, so he left when he wasn't even 3 years old, hadn't been back, and they all remembered him, big hug. It was his, and then it was really special. You can't really, they're reading my book, and there's photos which helped too, but it was a really touching moment this past spring break to share this with the guys. Right? And again, this is not a unique phenomenon, all right? Especially in Latino immigrant communities. Soccer is incredibly important, incredibly rich, and amongst all sorts of communities. And of course, here in Harrisonburg, there's a hugely rich history and tradition of soccer, especially amongst the Latino community. But what's interesting here, it orients much more around more league organized play. And this can, can be for certain reasons. There is pickup, but really where the action is the leagues. And there's this hugely vibrant, some of you might have seen it or had experience. It's called Liga Premier, Football del Valle Shenandoah. And the Smithland soccer fields, they kind of play around, but the city was so impressed, or I don't know, they built 2 more fields across the tracks, which is pretty much primarily used by this organization to really show how thriving it is. And the city got a bunch of money, and they're building more fields and stuff out there to really accommodate not just the Latino League, but kind of this interest in soccer. So I played, and I think I stopped playing this past spring, but they like to make fun of me in the local newspaper. Whenever I look silly, they would put me there. So I'm, my belly's out and I'm losing. But anyway, we won the game though. But El Charro was the team I played for, big business. So it really shows the connection between soccer and business and community. But if you look, this is Harrisonburg. The people travel, but it's really about Harrisonburg. There's 30 teams right there. There's 2 second divisions. It's hugely vibrant, right? It's this huge league. And most of the names here are Spanish, but there's Kurdistan. For a while, there was a Congolese team. Some teams are very, Salvadoran, Honduran, but more pan-Latino, pan-ethnic. But this hugely vibrant, you see Kurdish. Some are more local. But this really rich, and all the stuff that I document in my book in terms of friendship, kind of gaining a sense of self-worth, esteem, meeting partners, dating, all of this stuff kind of encircles, the richness of the soccer game. Again, it's during indoors well, all right, so they don't take time off. They play at Skyline Middle School. You can see all these teams, 12 plus 24, whatever that is. So again, lots and lots of interest. And most are Latino, but there's white guys. There's the Congolese had a team. There's a really kind of a rich mix of people, and it allows you to meet people you wouldn't necessarily meet at work, at church, or elsewhere. Soccer really kind of brings people together, and this is something that's important to me. So this is at Spotswood Elementary, where my kids go, we kind of organized mainly there's a woman actually in this photo, but mainly fathers at Spotswood who would come together to play soccer. It's been really meaningful to build connections, to share information about schools and teachers. We've had to negotiate a little with the school, so it's brought especially Latino fathers kind of in dialogue with administrators, and it's been this Tuesday, 8 p.m. That's where we're at. All right, and it's pandemic was rough on us, but we're back there playing, and it's been really great. So really, there's a famous book, How Soccer Explains the World, and there is maybe some, but you could say how baseball explains the world, how Rotary Club explains the world. To really look at soccer as a lens into the world. And I want to save some time, so I'll go a little quicker here on my current research on Los Manzaneros, or apple pickers. All right, so as many of you probably know, this is a huge history of apples, especially up in Winchester, but of course here closer to Harrisonburg, it's dwindling. It's not like it used to be, but up by Timberville, there's thousands of acres of apples, and most of the men now, within the last 5 to 10 years, they've really shifted to temporary guest workers. Right? They come on an H-2A visa. They come over legally. They can only work for that company, and they come over. Most of these men come over for about 3 months to pick apples, August to late November. Right? They're coming over on this visa. 10 years ago, it would have been a mix of undocumented and locals. Even before that, there was a lot of Jamaicans and Haitians, but there's really been this shift for all farmers. Right? The number of H-2A visas. There used to be a program called the Bracero program in the 1950s and 60s around World War II, where Mexicans would come to work. But this is kind of this newer version. When I started, it was at, low 100,000. We're creeping up to 400,000 a year. And farmers, it's expensive, it's cumbersome, but it's much more secure, it's much more stable, and farmers are really, especially for this labor-intensive agriculture, have shifted to this visa. So I've been really interested in understanding it and exploring it. So since I got here, actually one of my first classes, there was a student who was at Grace Covenant Church who told me that his church would go up to preach with the men and do outreach, and that's kind of how I got connected. So that's kind of my current work, and hopefully someday I'll have a book out about it too. But just kind of very quickly, I'm really interested in, because the grower, for good reason, doesn't want me like in the fields. So most of my research has been on kind of the social life of the camp. This is one of the camps. So one of the perks, if you will, of the H-2A program is the company pays for housing, transportation. And so they house the men in these kind of labor camps. And I'm really interested in kind of the social life of the camp, but also their connections to the outside, because it's very isolated. All right. There's a lot of green. All right. There's a food line 2-hour walk away in Mount Jackson. All right. So it's very kind of isolated. They're really here to work. All right, there's no bus stop over there. But that being said, there still is some connection with the outside community, which kind of transforms their experience here. Because there's a lot of isolation, there's a lot of boredom. It becomes the company takes them on Fridays to cash their checks, to buy groceries. So in terms of the essentials, they're taken care of. But I'm really interested in how they kind of broaden their contacts with the world around them. So this is them walking. And the big thing is transport, travel. All right, Harrisonburg's half an hour away. And unbeknownst to me, to my surprise, there's all sorts of people that are there willing to offer them rides. The big one are the Rideros, all right, the for-profit kind of informal taxi cab drivers that will come in with cars like that, charge $10, $15 a person, bring them to Harrisonburg. All right, in the fall, on a Sunday, you go where the Walmart is in town here. There's a couple where the Ross is and the Home Depot there. Again, this is a very Latino community, so it might be hard, but they're often there on Sundays doing their shopping, and a lot of it is through these paid travels, but also, especially there's a evangelical community at this church, Spanish speakers, the Hermanos, that also offer them rides. They have to go to church first, but then they drop them off. And then there's, because the Latino immigration is, it's so widespread, most of the men have family or friends within a 3-hour radius of here. I mean, we always think of Latino immigration just Los Angeles, Chicago, but as all of you know, there's a tremendous history of immigration from Latin America here in the Shenandoah Valley, but of course North Carolina and elsewhere. All right, so this is kind of what I'm doing. I'm going to go quickly here to take some questions. The big reason they want to travel is so that they can shop. Right? They make good money here. Right? And part of the perks of the job, now they work tremendously hard, but they make a good earning. Their minimum salary is, I think it's up to $14 an hour. It's well above the minimum wage, and they often make more when they're paid by pay rate. And still, again, it's well-earned money, but they have money, and one of the perks of this job is to buy things for themselves and family. They come back with suitcases full of clothing, but also chainsaws, flat screen TVs, cell phones. I mean, it's a big part of their job that they bring. Big part of their experience is bringing these things home. So this is just a lot of images of them shopping. But of course, vendors go to the camp as well. All right, there's money to be made. All right, and there's local connections. So this is somebody selling food. Many food vendors will come out. El Paisano down the street goes out there on Thursdays. And a lot of this came out of the pandemic, especially El Paisano. When travel was much more restricted, he would go out on Thursdays, and they love when he come out. Twice a year, this guy from Ohio drives Ohio all the way to North Carolina, stopping at camps along the way, selling used clothing, and the guy, $5, especially like cold weather clothing, is always a big hit. It's also, they have good times as well when they go out. I mean, again, there's this idea that they're not just workers, just like you are not just workers. They're also people that like to have a good time. And at the camp, they get a little bored, and it's nice to be able to go out. This was Jalisco's in Mount Jackson, which I don't think exists anymore. Right? And of course, these purchases matter for their lives back home. Everything the kid I took this photo, is stuff that he bought here. If I had panned the camera a little wider, I would have seen, he's got citrus groves. You could have seen equipment that he bought to tend to his fields. And one of the ironies, I don't know, some might say the injustices, that things in Mexico are actually much more expensive and harder to get than here in the US, even though salaries are way lower. When I'm talking about machinery, equipment, technology, is actually clothing is often much more expensive or of much cheaper quality. So this is really important, and you see his son Ian wearing this clothes. Right? Finally, there's also all of this social support, which I refer to as ecology, right? This kind of network of groups that go out to the camp to support the men. These are the hermanos, all right, preaching, getting to know the men. There's also legal aid. These are nurses that go out to attend to the men, which became really, really important during the pandemic. The company completely organized vaccinations in conjunction. This is actually way out of Martinsburg, but they have blanking on the name of the health organization. This is Migrant Ed at JMU. The Mexican consulate goes out to this. So all of it might seem super isolated, but all of these different groups, whether they're going out or people are coming, weird sociologists go to interact with them as well. So they're not as isolated as I might have presumed. Right? This is Migrant Ed out of JMU, getting English books. This was another kind of local kind of agricultural university, just showed up one day and kind of hung out with the men. And sometimes it's boring, but sometimes it's interesting. I say they sometimes like when women show up because it's a very male environment. So it's just, it changes up the day, and it's not this kind of like prison-like experience. Right? And again, final photo. And again, I'll just, to give a little time, 2 minutes, that I also try to integrate this in my teaching as well. All right, and sorry to have rushed, but there's my email if there's questions we don't get to.
Do you speak French?
I do, it's buried there, but I grew up speaking French, but now most of my, yeah.
How about, what does your name mean?
Well, it's actually it's funny for my cousins and friends. It means to be scared. Actually, which I got made fun of for having a funny name, but not because it means to have the truey means to have the fear. It's actually a very funny name in French, but don't tell anybody here.
I love your enthusiasm for sociology, and I would have loved to have you for a professor. Question: we have really tended to demonize immigrants much more recently than we were in the past. Is that going to intensify? Is that going to go away? It just seems like we've really demonized immigrants.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a long history. It goes up and down. I think this really gets ramped up around presidential elections. I think it will get ramped up in this next election, but also, there's the border crisis that is very much covered. There's a long history of what we refer to as kind of nativism or xenophobia. I don't know if this is necessarily new, but yeah, it has been ramped up. And regardless of your politics, it was really ramped up, during the Trump years. We'll see if it changes or not. But it's a very polarizing issue, as you know.
Question. You didn't touch it in your address, but you got so close that I can't not bring it up.
Yeah.
DACA is an issue that is of interest to me. I understand that the legality of it is coming and to the end, and it needs to be reevaluated. From a sociologist, in your background, what would you have to say about DACA and your perspective? I hope you would say, in talking about something of root to citizenship, because of people that have been here so long in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think first, the movement of the DACA is really tremendous in the terms of that. Again, I don't want to get too much into politics, but even President Trump, who really fashioned himself as kind of you could say immigrant, he would not touch DACA. He was not going against it because there really is this sense of, you are welcomed. You are in school. Do well. Work hard. You are American. Pledge of Allegiance. Again, we're talking about children. So it's this really unprecedented historical moment where even again Trump would not touch DACA. So I really think there's a widespread support across the political spectrum to do something more permanent with this population. Others would say, well, why are we making distinctions? All people should be welcomed. But there really is something unique and special and really unprecedented in terms of, they are telling the government, I am not here legally, all right? And this is where I live. This is my name. And the government is, at this point, again, it's still, there still is some limbo there, and we'll see what happens. But it's really, I think there is this broad support, which is pretty unprecedented in U.S. history, to protect this group. There's plenty of them here in Harrisonburg. Thank you.
David, great presentation. One of your chapters seems to be about conflict among friends or something like that. Did you find any ways that in the soccer leagues they work out conflict, and was it different than the way other people work out conflict?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about in terms of others, but what I found was really interesting. So when I first saw these fights, I was like, oh my God, this is crazy and this is so wild. But what I soon learned is that, so one of the surprising findings, so there wasn't fights all the time, but when you're there 5-6 years, you're going to see a fair amount of fights, is that there was never a rematch. Once people fought, it was done. All right, in this seemingly paradoxical way, fights actually helped to resolve conflicts. As there was this tension, it was brewing. All right, and again, this is not to say violence is good or violence is productive, but it did have this way of resolving some of the tensions. And secondly, LA is a pretty kind of violent and unsafe area. All right, so there was, when I would follow the men in bars or elsewhere on the streets, there was this uncertainty of violence, especially when you involve weapons. Where at the park, you knew, worst comes to worst, you might get a black eye because you knew people were there to break up the fight. Fights got broken up way before any serious harm. So there was a certain kind of one, constructiveness of the fight. It helped kind of settle the beef, if you will. But two, it was controlled in a way they could not count on when fighting somebody they didn't know. So at the end of the day, they cared for each other, they trusted each other. So that was kind of what I found was kind of unique about this type of violence.
Thank you, David. I think we're not through. I think there's a couple extra questions, but I'm gonna just call it to an end here. And if people have questions, you can come up and talk with David afterwards. But thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
With that, I will adjourn us.